Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Chris Ortega, the CEO of Fresh FP&A, and welcome to Beyond the Numbers. Beyond the Numbers is a series that I'm doing a podcast where I'm talking with industry leaders, experts, analysis, everybody in different industries outside of finance. I want to learn more just about business, about coaching, about marketing, about sales. So Beyond the Numbers is a series that I'm starting here at Fresh FP&A, where we get outside of the finance organization. We meet with those industry leaders. We get deeper insights that make us and empower us to be better finance, FP&A, CFO, and fractional CFO professionals. Really excited about here today. Today, I'm kicking off the first series, and I'm excited to have Katarina. Katarina, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. So I'm a high performance relationship coach. And what that means is I do essentially executive coaching, but focusing on the relationships with executives and entrepreneurs. And yeah, I mean, I've studied behavioral science, gender dynamics, been coaching for a while, been working for a coaching company. And really the whole relationship angle kind of came about very organically, which I'll be sharing probably as we get talking. I didn't start out in the relationship space. It really just very organically unfolded in quite an interesting way. So I'm looking forward to sharing more about that.
Yeah. And Katrina, it was really great because you reached out to me on LinkedIn, right? This is how we got connected. And I seen your background, I seen your experience, I seen your expertise and everything that you were doing. And I know for me, this is such an important topic because I know progressing throughout my career as an individual contributor, moving into leadership, moving into executive leadership, moving into like building my own business, the evolution that personal and professional relationships have been really, really important. And I'm eager to set and give some examples of some of those lessons learned and those failures that I had. So, Katrina, thank you so much for joining. And just to start off, I think one of the first things I want us to talk about is this rethinking balance. You hear this phrase thrown out a lot, work-life balance, and it's all
Yeah.
about balancing your life and your work, or life-work balance, or there's all these iterations of it. But when you think about for those executives, when they're looking at their personal relationships, how do they need to rethink balance in that aspect of their relationships?
Yeah, such a great question. And actually like a really nice segue into what I was getting at earlier, which is how the whole relationship angle came about. And I actually started out coaching execs on like balance. I started talking about balance, on clarity, on confidence, like all the kind of traditional stuff that we think about when we think about executive coaching. And my hypothesis was, well, there's a lot of burnt out, stressed out, anxious professionals out there. I mean, I was one. And this is the problem I'm going to solve for because I solved it for myself. And like, why wouldn't people want to solve it? But what I found as I began working with professionals on these kind of areas like anxiety, stress, no work-life balance, like that was like the tagline, work-life balance, work-life balance. When I began working with people on this
Right.
issue and I drilled down, because I always say like minimum 12 sessions if you really want to have like, I mean, you can have a transformation in one session, but ideally like 12 for that kind of longevity. That's my behavioral science nerd side coming out. But what I found as I began to drill down is there was a imbalance in the relational side of things. And that really kind of came down to two things, right? Like relationship to self. So I can talk for days about how an imbalance in our lives is a symptom of like not meeting our own needs, which is a symptom of having an unhealthy relationship to the self. And then that naturally will flow out into our external relationships, whether that's kind of like marital relationship, lack of personal relationships, even kind of friendships and family dynamics. And that's really what got me thinking, okay, like this is the area of life that I've always been passionate about, the area of life that I've probably had the biggest growth in. And I was too scared to talk about it openly because I was like, oh, what are people going to think? But then I kind of realized if I actually want to have significant scalable change, I think I just need to come out and talk about this. And so here I am.
Yeah, and first off, I love how you broke that down, and I want to go a little bit deeper into this because I love how you broke it off in those two channels, right? You talked about the relationship that you have with yourself and how that relationship has with others. And I know for me, like this is where, everybody that see me, I'm very honest, transparent and open, right? My relationship with self, Katrina, I'm raising my hand. I still have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what I mean with that. The reason why I have a problem with that is, when you're a high performing person, that type A person, I'm the hardest on myself than anybody ever will be against me, right? So, for me, like growing up and, a single parent, low income background where I grew up, right? I basically grew up in the hood in the west side of Indiana, Indianapolis, Indiana. And I've always like had that like critique and that criticism for myself, right? Like anytime I mess up, I'm like so hard on myself and I'm constantly beating myself down. I even have to take moments out, Katrina, where in leading Fresh FP&A, where I have to say, Chris, give yourself grace. It's okay that you don't have it figured out. It's okay that you made these mistakes. Like that relationship with self that you mentioned as like a foundation, that is probably one of the most important places to make sure you're putting that time, energy, effort, and commitment to improve, because that's one that, if you can't quiet the voices inside that are, how could you actually leverage on the external side of it? So for me, when you talked about that, I was sitting here taking a note, and I want all the people looking at this, man, the way that you're able to make sure you're taking care of yourself, which leads into my next question that I want to talk about. What are some ways that you've seen in working with in your business or working with executive and leaders? What are some ideas and ways that people can improve that relationship with their self?
Oh, I love that question. And I'm going to talk about an area that I think anyone who's worked with me is like, oh, she goes again, talking about this one topic. But the topic is so dear to my heart because I think it's like the biggest hack that we have when it comes to deepening our own relationship with ourselves. And also, to be honest, our relationship with other people. And that's looking at your needs. Like, what are your needs? So much of what we do in kind of operating in our day-to-day and going out there and achieving and building our businesses or climbing the corporate ladder is so removed from most of our needs. We might be meeting one or two of them, like our need for significance or our need for kind of like certainty, financial certainty, but a lot of the other stuff is going to get left behind. And very often we're kind of numbing out from the neck down, like we're just kind of up in our heads, like operating from a very rational cognitive space, and we're disconnected from what we actually need. And one of the kind of fastest ways is can you just take that bit of time to sit with yourself, lean in, get curious, and find out, like, what is it that I actually really need? And dig deep into that. It might take a while. Like the stuff that comes up at the initial kind of outset probably will just be a superficial, surface level rendition of what you really need. Like what you really, really need might be buried in there. But the faster that you can get clear on that, the faster you can connect with yourself, and the faster you can kind of begin to reorientate your life and make it work for you.
Man, that hit me hard, right? And the reason why I say that hits me hard is because I think, being a high performing person, like growing up as an individual contributor in accounting, moving to finance, moving into FP&A, moving into financial leadership, and then also moving into running my own company. When you talk about assessing your needs, here's the thing about it, like just from my vantage point, is at different stages of your personal life, at different stages of your career, that need, I call it like a need inventory. That's kind of what I took the gist of what you said. That need inventory is going to change, right? It's
100%.
going to evolve. You're going to evolve. And I think one of the biggest, and this is, this is all about relationships, and this is everybody looking. I'm going to say where I failed, right? Where I failed in assessing that need inventory is at points in my career and points in my personal life, I didn't understand that I was going through a need inventory transition, right? Like I was transitioning out the old inventory of needs, and I needed to take a step back and assess, what is my new need inventory? And I missed a couple of those transitions. I remember specifically when I moved from an individual contributor to a leader, right? Like when I started managing a team and I started managing people, that need that I had prior as an individual contributor of like, I needed to win, right? I needed to get those really big projects. I needed to get those enterprise level wins and those goals, right? I had this need to just succeed and succeed at the highest level, right? But when I move to a people leader and I'm managing a team, that need inventory is not necessarily valuable. And I failed in that because I didn't realize that the new need that I needed for my team and what my team needed out of me is I needed to empower them to get the wins and the big home runs and the big successes. I needed to do that, right? So I'm sharing that as an example because as you go through your career, as you go through your life, it's okay to assess that your needs may change, right? It may change, it may evolve, but make sure if you realize you're entering like in leadership, a transitional period, like you're moving from a manager to a VP or you're moving from a VP to the C-suite, you're probably going to have another set of needs professionally that you need to make sure you're taking care of. So I think that's really, really good advice. And that's my challenge to everybody looking at this, going back through and looking at it. Take a second, do a needs inventory, right? Just go through and say, hey, at this point in my life, professionally, at this point in my life, personally, what are my top 5 needs to make me feel fulfilled, to make me feel that I show up my best? So I love that advice. I love that advice.
Yeah, no, spot on. And I'd almost add as well that, the needs can change. Some of the needs, like the core needs, will probably still be there, like they'll be the same, but the way that they manifest and kind of the secondary needs that unfold from there and like the behaviors that come out from there, that's what will shift. And when I talk about, relationships, kind of the biggest thing that I see challenges with is you've got 2 high-performing individuals that both are working, 50 to 70-hour weeks, both are very busy, and both might actually have pretty different needs. And then when it comes to coming together in the relationship, there's a clash because one of them wants like uncertainty. I was literally working on this earlier today with a couple. Like one person needs uncertainty, they need more adventure, they need more kind of spontaneity, they need more travel, they need to be away. One of them needs more like closeness, intimacy, staying together. Like how does that possibly work, right? When you've got such kind of differing needs at odds with each other and you're so busy. And I mean, I love it. That's kind of where like my strategy brain comes out because it's kind of fun to begin to drill down into, okay, well, where are they actually compatible? Where are the behaviors actually congruent? How can we build a map to actually make our needs kind of work together as opposed to against each other? That's less about kind of connecting with self, but in order to even do that, you have to connect with yourself, right? If you don't connect with yourself, like how can you possibly know what you're solving for?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think what you talked about kind of segues into that second point around that you mentioned about rethinking balance, which is like, okay, we've got a great framework to think about ourselves, but now we start, once you involve other people in that, things start to get complicated pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're like a great example that you mentioned, and I think is a great use case that I want us to explore and kind of like diagnose, is like you said, you gave a great example. And I know personally I share this, right? My girlfriend, she's in HR, she's a significant leader, she's stepped up, she's doing a great job, and like she's getting into another season of her career where she has to put in that work and she's rising to the level, right? But we had to have a conversation and sit down and say, okay, like I know that you're coming into a new season of your career that's going to change how our interactions happen, right? Because I'm not going to slow down, you're not going to slow down, but we still need to find a way where both of those cars are able to say, okay, we may be running at different speeds, but we know 2 miles we're going to go across this exit and maybe go do something, right? So for those executives and leaders that may be struggling to balance their external relationships, right? Maybe that's with their partners, maybe that's with their family, maybe that's with their kids, whatever aspect of the external relationship personally that they're struggling with, what is some advice, like your top 3 tips that you would give them to kind of help them in managing and rethinking balance of those external relationships now?
Yeah, really good question. And I think it's one that plagued so many people, and kind of why I like to focus on this demographic of people, right? Because if you're not working, if you're just, I don't know, like chilling because you're naturally affluent and wealthy and you don't need to work, then you probably have very different problems that I can't relate to. So
Nobody, yeah, facts.
right, yeah, like I don't know how that works. I only know the struggle because I've struggled most of my life trying to be, achieving and jumping through all the hoops. First generation immigrant. But anyhow, so when you think about that kind of tension, the best thing that we can do again is there's a number of things to do, but one of them is to look at the needs and get really clear on, okay, what are my high priority needs? Do a comparison with the very people who are seemingly in opposition with that, and see where can we overlap? Where can we actually be more intentional with our time? Because really, it's all about that intentionality. You can have a perfectly amazing, flourishing, wonderful relationship with only a few hours a week. Like you can, if you're very intentional with that time. Like you might not want to do that forever. But if we're talking about, short term, couple of years max, as you're building something that's really worth building for, and you have that shared vision, you can get by with little time. You just have to make that time that you have together so ultra precious and intentional. And in order to do that, you have to know what you're doing with that time. It can't just be sitting at home watching Netflix. Like that's not going to fly. In order to know what you're doing with that time, again, you have to know the needs, and you have to know what are we actually trying to solve for in this time together. So that's kind of like the really big one, and comparing it with each other, right? And then it's also about prioritization, like I just mentioned. So getting really clear on like, what are your priorities? And I'll never forget, I was in Vancouver visiting old friends last year. And I talked to one like very successful entrepreneur at this event. And I was talking about the work that I do. And he kind of stopped there and he was thinking, and he was like, you know what? You're right. He's like, ask me any day what my number one priority in life is, and I'll tell you it's my wife and kids. And then he's like, but if I actually do the math on how many hours a day I spend with them, and he like sat there in front of me, doing the math. He's like cleaning my teeth and getting dressed in the morning and making my coffee and whatever. In the end, it was like maybe 45 minutes that he had with his family that was actually like intentional time. And let's be honest, in those 45 minutes, you're probably not being very intentional. You're probably exhausted. You might not even want to speak. I know, like, I watched my parents just kind of come home and be like, I didn't want to talk. I'm so tired and drained.
Right.
And really, like, the intentional moments distill down to what, like a kiss goodnight, maybe? It's pretty awful, right? Like, it's not going to last. Of course it's not going to last. No way.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important parts that you mentioned, and this is where for me it kind of like is time, energy, and effort. So I always have this conversation with my sister, right? Because like, so me and I have if for everybody who doesn't know, I have a twin sister, right? We're polar opposites in everything. And when I say polar opposites, Katrina, like we are literally polar opposites. She's taller, I'm not as tall. I'm darker, she's lighter. She's English, I'm math. I'm extrovert, she's introvert. Like we are literally polar opposites. And we are polar opposites in terms of how we invest our time, energy, and effort. So for example, one of the relationships and hat that I wear amongst a lot of them is, I'm an uncle. I have nieces, I have nephews, I have brothers that had a bunch of kids, and I'm an uncle, right? That uncle role from a time and prioritization is different than my sister's role as an aunt, right? Like my sister's heavily involved with, going to my nieces and nephews, like games and marching bands. And like my sister's always been a person, at least from a family perspective, where she's entrenched. She's always like, if something's going on with the family, my sister's there, right? But when you look at me, I'm saying like, look, when I don't have an infinite amount of time. And for me, I think the time that we have is the most valuable asset a person has. The reason why I think time is the most valuable asset from like a business perspective, from a life perspective, is because we don't know how much of it we have, right? Like, I don't know how much time I have. You don't know how much time you have. So when you decide to make that decision to invest time, that's a pretty big life asset conversion that you're doing. And I found this difference and this friction with my brother and his wife and other people because they've had and it gets to the point that you mentioned. They had this expectation. They were like, well, your sister does it, Chris. Why can't you be more like her? And I said, I had to take a step back. And this is the point I want to give to everybody around what you mentioned around time and prioritization of it. You have to make sure somebody's external expectations of your time and prioritization doesn't, like, if that conflicts, if you think I need to have more time and prioritization externally than I am willing or able to commit, that's where you need to have a very honest conversation. And here's the thing with executives and leaders and a lot of people that you coach. When we put on the business hat of that, Katrina, it's so easy for us to do. Like, it's so easy to go into our time management prioritization. For me, it's the Eisenhower matrix, right? Where I look at things between urgency and important, and I can easily put things in boxes of like, nope, I need to delegate this, I need to plan that, I need to do this, I need to not do this, right? But when it comes to that personal side, right, that transition not necessarily happens. And I think that's one of the most important things is you need to make sure externally you're setting those clear expectations that say, hey, this is what my time, energy, and effort means to me. And if I decide to dedicate that to you, to something else, this is the value that I'm bringing. Because I think a lot of time people just dismiss that and say, oh, yeah, like, they just have a baseline expectation of their mind is like, no, it's like, no, my time is different. I'm not saying it's more valuable than yours. I'm saying how I choose to allocate it is a value creation conversation. It's an investment decision that I'm making when I decide to spend time to something, you know?
Yeah. Super interesting. Like, isn't it fascinating how at the beginning of a relationship, we view time differently than how we view it when we're in the family or we're in the marriage or in kind of the significant, long-term thing. Like, at the beginning of a personal relationship, whether it's a friend or a romantic one, whatever it might be, we respect time. We respect time almost like we respect time in business. Like, business time is kind of the pinnacle, right? We view that in a very different way to any other type of time. And then, I mean, that's like number one. And then the new person time is probably almost as important. We want to be on time, want to respect their time. We're mindful of how much time we've had together. But then once you kind of move into that, we're in a intimate dynamic, it like goes out the window. And this is one of the biggest things I see. I don't do much kind of couples work or couples coaching, but I do a little bit of it. And one of the biggest kind of challenges is, you have all these brilliant tools and techniques and practices and off you go, but no one's got the time. And that's when I'm like, but you have the time and you're very disciplined with your time because you're all high achievers here. So how is it that on a Saturday you wake up and suddenly you just don't have time? To me, it's like, is it a lack of respect? Is it a lack of, I don't see the tangible ROI? Like, what is it? And I found in some instances it can be helpful to actually be like, okay, let's reframe this. Because at the end of the day, if you head into a divorce, it's going to be the worst business decision that you could ever possibly make. So, right? Like, so it is a business decision to actually show up and prioritize. So let's just reframe it, shove some KPIs in it, put whatever language feels good to you and off you go. Strategic team meeting. But there is something quite fascinating here. And I'm curious, like, where that's coming from. And it's probably the same stuff, to be honest, that led me to have my own aversion to doing the relationship work. Because, a year and a half ago when I decided I want to go and build a coaching practice, my first thought was, I want to be like in the relationship space. Like, this is what I've studied. This is what I've dedicated my life to. This is the thing I've had the biggest kind of growth in. And I can talk about it for days, but I'm scared because people won't take me seriously. And I need to be a business coach, or I need to do something business related. And that's really problematic, I think, because the repercussions, right? The repercussions are so big from our personal relationships, way bigger than many business repercussions, to be honest, because sure, you can get emotionally traumatized by business, but it doesn't encompass every aspect of your life necessarily.
Oh yeah. And I think this kind of segues into like the perfect in our next topic that I just want to transition to. And I think it segues perfectly into it, which is around like establishing deeper relationships and connections, right? We talked a little bit about, the relationship that you have with yourself and how to rethink that balance. You gave some great actionable and practical tips and strategies for people to implement. But now when it talks about establishing those deeper connections and deeper relationships, here's the thing I want to challenge you on. Relationships are hard. I don't care what kind of relationship it is. It could be a coach to a player. Relationships are difficult and they go through seasons, right? For example, like I think one thing I've always prided myself on, and this is both like speeds over to the professional side of my life and also the personal side, is like I don't like the superficial, like, hey, how's it going? My name is Chris. How's your Monday? My Monday's great. How's your Monday? It's like, no. Let's get past like, how can I help? How can I support? How can I establish connection? And I think one of the biggest things that I've had to overcome is, and I've learned this in business, I've learned this in my personal life, Katrina, is I'm a very like giving person. Naturally, that's who I am. I'm a giver. Like if I have anything, if I have the last piece of bread, I'll give it to you. If I have I'm constantly giving, right? But establishing relationships with people that are not necessarily, if they're takers and that's their natural inclination, I'm going to constantly just feel like I'm being drained, right? So one of the questions that I have for you around this topic of establishing deeper connections and deeper relationships is, what is the first step, or what's that like really quick guide of like, hey, if you want to go establish deeper connections personally or professionally right now, here's this quick start guide for you to happen. What's your insights on that?
Yeah, great question. And it's quite basic, but I think that we don't do it enough, like generally. And it's a really lovely thing that you can do as you're kind of getting to know a connection. You can even, do this in your marriage, like heck, just do it in any relationship. The kind of the principle behind it is that when we think about needs, my favorite topic, every single human, I would argue, or 99.999% of humans have the need to feel seen and to feel heard, to feel essentially like they matter, right? And so much of communication, when someone's talking to us, we're not even thinking about what they're saying. We're already thinking about our response, and we're not actively listening. And they can tell that. They can pick up on that. You can tell that in the thematics, in the way that the body's being held. You can tell when someone's not really listening. So we're kind of constantly going around not really seeing people, not really hearing them. We're like projecting our own stuff, or we're not listening to them. And actually, it's kind of like moments of disconnect happening all the time. And so as you're getting to know someone, you want them ideally to, if you want to build a connection, to feel seen and heard by you. And so how can you do that? Ask them a question, or even better, ask them to tell you a story. Ask them to tell you a story that will get them kind of thinking creatively, okay, what story do I want to share? And, maybe they bring up something from the past, or maybe something vulnerable from their childhood, or whatever it might be. And then listen, like let them tell the story. That's such a nice, quick way of allowing them to share something about themselves. And it doesn't have to be weird. You can say like, oh, tell me about a story when you got a promotion. Great. And then go listen to that story, right? And it allows people to kind of feel seen and heard. And that just creates that immediate bond so quickly. You become trustable in that act.
Yeah, and I love where you mentioned about so many times people don't, and I had a great mentor tell me this, and this is someone, it changed my whole philosophy. A lot of people like they want to be understood before they understand, right? And one of the things he's always told me is like, Chris, have the patience to seek understanding, then be understood, right? And I think what you just elaborated on is like so powerful, and it's a great action item for people. Like the ability to be an active listener, to take and say, hey, I've processed what you said, and I'm going to allow you the space to and what you mentioned kind of highlighted something that I remember reading about, and it's called like giving people the space to take an emotional breath. And the whole idea of the emotional breath is like, man, people got things on their, and if you can feel that sometimes, that it's like there's a tension or there's something like with this person. I remember putting this in the application as a leader, right? I had a person on my team, And, she was taking care of her mom and like her brother, and she had a son. She had a lot on her shoulders. And she was always a high performer. She was always a high potential person on the team. She always did a great job. But I started to see that this was whatever was going on in her life started to carry over to work. It started to carry over to her relationships. So I remember being in my office with her, and I sat down and I said, hey, it seems like something's going on. What's on your mind? And the power of that question, Katarina, is because what's on your mind, you can take it whatever way you want to go. Like, it's a very open path, right?
Yeah.
And she took it down, talking about the difficulty that she's having with her mom's immigration, with her brother who's like dropping out of school, her son, and she just talked, right? And she talked and she got done. And I said, what else? And she kept going. And I said, let me know more. And this was, and I could just see the weight and the emotion that she just felt like, thank you. I can finally have a safe space as a leader in a professional environment, dealing with something personally, that I can take an emotional breath. And I remember at the end of the conversation, right? And the whole time she's talking, Katarina, I wasn't like, I wasn't thinking through strategies. I wasn't like, well, have you thought about doing this? Have you? Most leaders go through solution mode. Like you go in, you want to start solutioning things, right? We got done with the conversation, and at the result at the end, she came up to me and she gave me a hug and she says, Chris, I can't tell you how impactful that was to have your time, even though it's business. Like this was during the day. This wasn't like outside of work. This was like right before we go to lunch. And she said, Chris, thank you for taking the time. And I know this wasn't about work. It wasn't about business, but I feel so much better that having you as a leader that I can go through and I can feel safe. I can feel like I'm understood. I can feel like that I can be vulnerable, and you don't tell me how I should fix it. You let me know that it's okay that you are fixing it. Two completely different things. And I think back to like sharing that as an example, man, as leaders, we have you don't understand how much power we have in terms of like, not only turning people, like I've had people on my team that I've had to let go. I've had people on my team that have been low performers that I've taken to high performers. I've had teammates and led teams where I've had high performers that you see it all. But at the end of the day, right, I think the most important piece for leaders to take away is giving them that time that you talked about. Stop it. Stop listening to respond and start listening to understand. That as a quick start guide that you mentioned is a superpower of establishing relationship. Because, and this is where I want to talk to you more about like relationships and establishing them. I think when you focus on those things, right? Great relationships are built on two core competencies, at least what I see. And I want to get your thoughts on what do you think of the foundation of great relationships. The first one is trust. The second one is like capacity and how do I trust this person, or are they competent, right? Trust and competencies are like the two different things, right? And always in business, right? This is the business hat. We always want to make sure that somebody is like the most competent finance person, the most competent HR person, the most competent legal person. We focus on competencies naturally as an inclination on the professional side. But personally, we need to focus on building trust with people, right? And I would challenge and venture to say, both personally and professionally, when you're talking about building great relationships, you need to focus on trust in both of them. So that gets to me. I'm going to ask you this question. If you were to able to distill down great relationships between personal relationships, what are some of those core competencies that are inside of that great relationship?
Yeah, such a great question. And I thank you for sharing everything. Like I love hearing all of that. And actually just wanted to kind of add to the story that you shared, about, kind of just being able to share. I will say something that I've seen consistently. and I don't think I'm the anomaly in this, but when a leader leans in to listen and to seek to understand, whether it's a direct report, whether it's whoever in the company, and especially if someone going through a hard time, and you create that trust and you create that sense of being seen, you create that sense of being heard, you're going to get a much more devoted person working in that organization.
Thanks.
Right? Like,
Absolutely.
I know from my own experience, the companies that I have stayed at, the companies that I have respected the leadership are the ones where I was like, I can let out a sigh of relief. I can breathe. I feel safe. I feel seen. And there's a lot of hard things that happen in our lives. Like, my dad's in Ukraine. When Ukraine war started, I was like, holy cow, I can't talk about this to anyone. And ultimately, I have left a company because I didn't feel that I could talk about it. Whereas I know that if I had that space to just reveal, like, I'm going through a bit of a hard time, like, don't get me wrong, I'm going to be here every day working as hard as I can, because if anything, I'm kind of trying to numb out at this point. But just let me feel seen and heard. Don't just dismiss, like, employees' very real emotions and life experiences, right? So again, just kind of that emphasis you had on, like, seek to understand is huge. It's huge. Like, the impacts on your company are tremendous. And then to the kind of was it you said the core foundations of a good relationship? Like,
so when you look at the core, like, what's that secret sauce of, like, all your experience in, like, helping with personal relationships, what would you say are the top 3 things that you see in great relationships, right? Like, those are, I want to know your secret sauce, because mine, as I mentioned earlier, was like trust and competency, right? Like, that's kind of the lens of, like, if you got a great relationship, you got a lot of trust and you have a lot of confidence that you feel in that person, right? Like, I trust you, and I know what I trust you with, and what you trust me with, we can do it, right? So looking at your experience from the personal angle, you've seen obviously a lot of great relationships, and you've probably worked through a lot of not so good relationships. What is that secret sauce? That secret sauce of, like, man, Chris, when I consistently see great relationships, here's like the 1 to 3 things that I see.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of them overlaps with yours. Trust. You have to have trust. Though I would argue that trust is kind of a symptom of the other 2. And the other 2, which are kind of like the foundational ones, I kind of imagine everything like a little system, but one is safety. If you don't have safety in a relationship, you have nothing. In a personal relationship, right? And I would argue in a business relationship too. If you don't have safety, you don't feel safe to show up, to be honest, to be authentic, you really can't build anything on top of that, because anything that you do build is very likely going to be built from a place of dishonesty, of hiding, of shape-shifting, of people-pleasing, of denying things, whatever it might be. You have to have safety if you want to grow and evolve a healthy relationship. So safety is absolutely key. And then the second one is back to my favorite topic, but there has to be a willingness to meet each other's needs. And that's not to say that we're looking for some kind of, hugely codependent dynamic, but in any relationship, whether we like it or not, I know there's been some kind of, in pop culture, this whole thing of, like, your needs are your needs and my needs are my needs. That's not how relationships work. Every relationship is built on some kind of a mutual exchange. Sure, you have to work on your own needs to, at least like 50%, but there has to be a mutuality, a willingness to lean in and meet someone where they're at and give them what they need. Otherwise, again, you have nothing. Even, us kind of working together on this live stream right now, we're meeting each other's needs here. Like, we're meeting each other's needs. It's the same thing. And I feel safe with you, and here we are. So safety and meeting each other's needs is a big one. And then on top of that, you have trust, because the trust will come right after that. And then, of course, there are other factors as well, but they're kind of the consistent ones. And when I look at toxic dynamics, or when some people come to me and they might be in a relationship, but they're not sure if they should stay or they should go, I get that. I actually get that a lot more than I thought I would ever get that. And when we drill down into it, it really comes down to, well, they don't feel safe and their needs aren't getting met. And they don't really want to necessarily meet the other person's needs, because actually their needs aren't in alignment. And maybe they don't even respect the other person's needs, right? Which is completely valid as well. And so there's that disconnect. And that's when, much harder to recover.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned there, and I want to take that and break it down a little bit more. Just trust, safety, and meeting people's needs. I would actually throw another superpower in there, right? I think this is like the four. So you got you got like the gold medal, the silver medal, and the bronze. Trust is definitely the gold medal. Safety is the silver medal, and then meeting needs is bronze. But I would say the platinum medal that's in there, right? Great, honest communication. Like I've like, and this is where I failed in personal relationships early on in my career, because I wasn't able, and I think a lot, and this is where I'm gonna go down an angle that may be a little uncomfortable for people, but it's just, I think a lot of people struggle with this, and I've struggled with it, and I continue to struggle with it. I think it is this stereotype around men that we should not. I don't know if society, I don't know what caused this, right? And maybe it was, I think, diagnosing and going to the root cause for me, Katrina. I think a lot of it came to like how I grew up and the environment I was around. But the stereotype that I'm talking about specifically for men is men shouldn't show or communicate our emotions. Like, we always have to be the strongest. And I think this carries over to leadership. I think it's always looked at that leaders, we always need to be poised. We always need to have the answer. We need to know the direction. And I've looked at it from a personal perspective that, I struggle earlier on of this stereotype of being a man and expressing my emotions and communicating that, right? And I would keep a lot of things bottled in. I would just say, when people ask me how I was doing, I'd be like, I'm doing good. But I knew internal, that relationship with self that we talked about, I was free falling, right? Like I was spiraling. But I felt like where I had to show up, and I felt like this as a leader, I felt like this as a brother, as a partner, as a son, all the different personal hats that I wear, I had to show up to say, oh, I'm fine, like I'm good, like yeah, I'm good. But the moment that I realized is like, I remember the first time I had like, and I'll tell it, I had an emotional breakdown, right? I remember I was working full time. I was working full time. I was going to school full time to get my MBA. I wasn't having the best like personal relationship. And I remember coming back home from school, like leaving a class one night, because I was working full time. I was going to class 4 days a week. I was doing everything. And I remember coming back home, and I just had my mom and my sister and my partner at the time that I was there. And I broke down, Katrina. I said, I can't take all these weights anymore, right? And I remember breaking down. I was the crying, the just everything. And I'll never forget that moment, Katrina, and I'll never forget how relieved and how open that I felt, that I was like, it gets back to safety, right? And like, I was able to, with my mom and my sister and they were like, Chris, like, you should have told us this earlier. Like, we could have done something. Like, and my mom, she sat me down and she said, Chris, let this be a lesson in your life. Oh, if you have a way that you feel, express it. Be respectful, right? But what you learn right now is like your passion and your feelings are your greatest skill set. But when you don't leverage them correctly or express them correctly, they could destroy you. And when she told this to me, even now, it hits me in my heart, because that was the moment I realized, I was like, man, it's okay for me to say, as a leader, I don't have all the answers. It's okay for me to be, as a leader, to say, I'm scared about the direction that we're going, but here's what we're going to do, right? I think that vulnerability emotionally in your personal relationships and your professional relationships and around communicating that effectively, it like, if you can communicate your emotions effectively and authentically, that equals high level of emotional intelligence. I'm going to say, Katrina, as a leader right now, if there's one takeaway, everybody looking at this video, if you can balance IQ and EQ, I would tell you invest in EQ every day of the week. That is the 100%. Highest return you're ever going to get out of life is having higher emotional intelligence.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, AI can do the rest for us, right? So you need that EQ. No, you're spot on. You're spot on. And you raised a really interesting point, actually, that so my background, my academic background is in studying masculinity. It's literally what I went to Oxford and studied for, on a scholarship. And it's important to the discussion because there is so much of that unhelpful structure of like, this is how men have to behave. And it's all nonsense, right? Like everyone has to have the freedom, deserve the freedom to express what's going on for them authentically and openly without being judged for it. Absolutely. Like it's one of the biggest kind of challenges I see a lot of with my male clients that come in. And I, funnily enough, actually work with more men than women, which again, I wasn't really expecting.
Nice.
Yeah. And I have at times been like, oh, do I want to just go and work with men? But I'm like, no, keep it equal. D&I, come on. Anyhow, but what I find a lot is that a lot of the men that come to me, there's this kind of idea of like, I don't have any needs, or I don't even know what they are, right? Like so disconnected. Or they might have their needs, but they're too afraid to speak up because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be too much. They don't want to seem needy. Women have the same thing, but it just comes up in different ways. And I think it's one of the biggest heartbreaks that I see, right? Especially when I look at like my loved ones, like my brother. I think one of the reasons I ever even decided to look at masculinity, like kind of professionally and academically, I started when I was like 17. But it's because I look at my brother and, he's from an Eastern European background, and the poor guy, I don't think he's ever really had the chance to express his needs and express what he wants, right? And I will say, like, I think it's my biggest, like, heartbreak. And I'm his younger sister, like, there's only so much I can do to help without it being also weird for him. So, but then I would look at, like, my ex-partners and my father, and I saw this kind of common theme of, like, yes, when it comes down to communication, like men have had the short end of the stick. Like this is one area where women have actually been blessed, right? Because we're allowed to talk vulnerably. And in the realm of relationship, you have to be able to have that vulnerable, candid, open, honest conversation, because when you don't, the repercussions are so much worse than any kind of negative reaction, right? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah, right? Like the long marriage that goes on that shouldn't be going on, the hidden truths, like the pains. And again, the brain will always find a way to get its needs met. So if you have needs that you're not expressing vulnerably and openly and like, authentically, you're not getting them met, it will find a way to get them met. And that way might not be so nice. It might not be so helpful for the relationship or for you. It might be self-destructive. So it's like the most important thing, like you said. And yeah, I mean, if I could wave a flag and scream from the rooftops, it would be this.
And I love it. It kind of segues in the last topic we talked about, where I think it comes down to confidence, right? And the third thing we're going to talk about is leading with confidence, right? And when you're able to rethink that balance, as we talked about in the first one, right? You're able to have that great relationship with yourself. You're able to carry that over to external relationships. You talk about, and you gave a great framework for everybody on how to establish and what is that secret sauce of establishing deep relationships, which is trust, safety, meeting the needs. And I kind of threw in there that communication aspect of it. And the last piece of it is talking about leading with confidence. And to me, I think like this is a touchy one for me, because I don't think always you should lead with confidence, right? I think the best, and this just may be me, I'm curious, drop in the comments what you think you should lead with. But to me, I think you should lead with empathy more than you should lead with confidence. Because confidence is one of those, I would say one of those emotions that is very borderline. It can quickly go to ego real quick, right? Like confidence can go to ego real quick. But when you think about in relationships, right, and leading with confidence or leading with empathy, what are some skills or some ways that you've seen people be really successful in leveling up their leadership skills in those two areas?
What a great question to end on. And I love that you kind of moved away from the confidence piece, right? Because you're right, the confidence, the whole kind of fake it till you make it, it's inauthentic. Like, yes, to an extent, you want to kind of put aside your inner critic and imposter syndrome stuff, but it's not helpful to operate from the ego. Like, it's not. We're not living in the wilderness. We don't need that anymore. So one of my kind of models, and I literally like teach this to my clients if they're going on a date, if they're single and they're trying to feel confident for a date. I call it, it's gonna sound really woo-woo, and sorry, LinkedIn, but I call it just leading from the heart.
Let's go. I love that.
One of my favorite teachers, John Wineland, he talks about leading from the core. But for me, it's just like leading from the heart. And I think that's another really awesome hack for confidence, for like conflict resolution, for getting more empathy out there, whatever it is. Can you drop the energy and the attention out from your head, which is where like ego is harping on and your imposter syndromes are living there rent free and there's like chaos in there? Can you take that attention out from there and drop it down into your heart and just let it stay there for a little bit? And just when you keep your attention there, can you breathe into it and just kind of ground into that spot, into that place? When you're there, like if everyone right now just did a little practice of take your attention out of your head and into your heart, your shoulders will go down, like your breath will slow down. You'll probably kind of lean back a little bit and your facial like muscles will relax. And it's all the good things that come with confidence without having to fake it. All you're doing is just dropping down into that kind of more authentic part of you that isn't the adaptive part of you, right? So leading from the heart is my favorite thing. And I just final thing I'll say in leadership, this will work because tons of studies have come out that when a leader is able to lead with vulnerability, with that authenticity, with that courage, with that openness and willingness to be like, hey, I might be wrong here. And I'm doing the best that I can for the greatest good of all, because here's what I'm hoping to achieve with this. There's going to be more trust, right? There's going to be way more trust than someone who's like, rah, 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 I know everything. Like, no one trusts that. I mean, they might do, but not many people trust that. So leading from the heart is my kind of favorite thing with confidence.
Man, I can't, like, that right there. That hit me in my heart because I think that is such an important philosophy for leadership, both in business and in your personal relationships, right? Like, and it is like your heart and your emotions and that place that you can tap in, like that you can tap into. I can tell people it will, like, there's been leadership situations where, you know, I still basically everybody that's ever worked with me, I wouldn't say everybody, majority of people, you know, they always reach out to me and they're going in their leadership and they always say like, Chris, man, it was such a great, like, I felt like I learned so much from you, not to be just a better leader, but just to be a better person. And to all those people going back, looking at this, like, lead with the heart, right? Now it gets conflicting, right? Because sometimes the heart and the brain is like, you know, I think in business, I will also find myself in situations where, you know, I led with the heart and I should have probably made a more brain logical decision. But when it comes down to your personal relationships and just like how you show up in life, right? How do I want to show up for my family? How do I want to show out for my significant other? How do I want to show up for my friends? All the different like personal relationships and titles that you have, right? Lead with your heart. Katarina, absolutely love it. I really appreciate this conversation. If all the viewers, if they want to learn more about you, connect with you, maybe get some coaching sessions, where can they connect with you? Where can they get resources? Where can they learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I live on LinkedIn these days, apparently. But I am actively trying to get onto Instagram. So God forbid that I'm on there, but I am. So at Katarina Polonska, my name. And then my website, katarinapolonska.com, has all the info that you'll need and a pretty rich blog. I write there quite frequently. And you can book a call with me there. So hope to hear from you.
Awesome. Hey, Katarina, thank you so much. And then also for everybody looking at this, I'll make sure to drop those links in the description to Katarina's website to learn more. Katarina, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for all your energy. I was sitting here taking a bunch of notes and got so much things that you got my mind going and thinking about. Katarina, thank you so much for your time, energy, and insights. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you for attending this LinkedIn Live and this YouTube. We're everywhere else. Make sure to stay tuned for Beyond the Numbers. We're going to have continued episodes where we'll talk with industry leaders in different industries outside the finance organization to give you these practical insights, to give you this information to help you empower and enable you and your career, whether you're a finance person, you're a FP&A, you're a CFO or fractional CFO. Beyond the Numbers is going to be the podcast to help you, give you all these practical insights, all this life learned knowledge. Thank you so much for coming and joining. And as I always end, keep pushing, never settle, and the best is yet to come. Let's get it. Thank you, everybody.